The morning sun was rising over New Geneva when the first alien ship appeared in Earth's sky. It was massive, bigger than any space station humans had ever built. The ship looked like a living thing, with smooth curves and a surface that seemed to breathe. Within minutes, dozens more ships materialized around Earth's orbit. Doctor was drinking her morning coffee when her emergency communicator started screaming. She was Earth's top expert on alien life, though until today that had been purely theoretical work. She rushed to the Global Defense Center, where chaos filled every room. Admiral stood at the main display screen, watching the alien vessels with calm eyes. He was a tall man with gray hair and steady hands that had commanded Earth's space forces for 20 years. "Any hostile movements?" he asked his tactical officer. "No, sir, they're just waiting." Burst into the command center. "What do we know?" 12 ships, each the size of a small moon. "No weapons fire, no communication attempts," replied. "They arrived 30 minutes ago." Stared at the display. After decades of wondering if humans were alone in the universe, the answer had come all at once. "Have we tried to contact them?" "Every frequency we know, nothing." Then the screens changed. Every television, computer, and communication device on Earth showed the same image. A being of pure light stood before them, shifting between different forms like flowing water. When it spoke, the words appeared directly in everyone's mind, translated into their native language. "People of Earth, I am ambassador of the Iran Confederation. We come not as conquerors, but as messengers of grave warning." The world fell silent. Every human on the planet stopped what they were doing to listen. "Your species has recently achieved faster-than-light travel. This advancement has brought you to our attention, but more importantly, it has brought you to the attention of something far worse. In 3 cycles of your star, approximately 150 of your years, an ancient terror will awaken. They are called the Devourers." The image changed, showing vast dark shapes moving between stars. Watched in horror as entire planets were consumed, their matter converted into energy that fed the massive creatures. Every 50,000 years, the Devourers emerge from their sleep in the void between galaxies. They consume everything in their path. Entire civilizations, star systems, even the stars themselves become food for their endless hunger. We represent 12 species that have survived previous cycles by hiding, running, or adapting in ways that diminish what we once were. Admiral leaned forward. "What do they want from us?" As if hearing his question, Ambassador continued. "We offer your species sanctuary in the Outer Rim territories, far from their predicted path. Your population is small enough that we can relocate you entirely. The alternative is extinction." Felt her stomach drop. Everything humanity had built, their home world, their colonies, all of it would be lost. "Why warn us?" asked aloud. "Why risk yourselves for a species you've never met?" The alien's form shifted, becoming more solid. For a moment could see something like a face in the flowing light. "Because in our observations of your expansion patterns, we have noticed something unusual. Your species behaves unlike any other we have encountered. Most species, when they reach the stars, follow predictable patterns. They seek resources, establish trade, build defensive positions. But humans do something different." "What do we do?" whispered. "You adapt everything you encounter for purposes we cannot predict. You take tools and use them as weapons. You take weapons and use them as tools. You solve problems that other species simply accept as unsolvable. This troubles us." The admission hung in the air. The aliens weren't just offering help out of kindness. They were worried about something. "We have survived 47 devourer cycles by following careful protocols developed over millions of years. Each species has found their way to endure. The crystalline architects hide in pocket dimensions. The void runners exist as nomadic fleets that never stay in one place. The hive mind collective spreads their consciousness across billions of bodies, so they cannot be entirely destroyed." Realized what the alien wasn't saying. Every survivor species had given up something fundamental about themselves to live. "The Devourers learn from every species they consume," continued. "They absorb not just the physical matter, but the knowledge, the technology, the very essence of what made each civilization unique. After millions of years and countless meals, they have become nearly unstoppable." Admiral stepped forward. "Nearly." There was a pause. No species has ever successfully fought them directly. Combat only makes them stronger. They adapt to every weapon, counter every strategy, absorb every defense. The only survival is in becoming something they do not consider worth consuming. "What happens if we refuse your offer?" asked. "Then your species will join the billions of others whose screams echo through our historical records. The Devourers do not negotiate, they do not show mercy, and they do not leave anything behind." Looked around the command center. Every face showed the same mixture of fear and disbelief. Humanity had barely reached the stars, and now they were being told they had to abandon everything or die. "How long do we have to decide?" she asked. "Your leaders may take time to consider, but understand this: the decision affects not just your species, but the entire galactic community. If humanity chooses to fight, your resistance could draw the Devourers deeper into populated space. Your extinction could doom others." The weight of it hit like a physical blow. They weren't just deciding humanity's fate, but potentially the fate of countless other civilizations. "We will establish a communication post on your moon," announced. "When you are ready to accept evacuation, contact us there. Do not wait too long. The preparations for such a massive relocation require significant time." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Admiral turned to, "What do you think?" Looked at the display showing Earth's blue marble hanging in space, surrounded by the alien ships. "I think we need to learn everything we can about these Devourers before we make any decisions. And if what they're telling us is true..." Thought about every human achievement, every breakthrough that came from refusing to accept limitations. Then maybe it's time someone tried a different approach than hiding or running. Smiled grimly. "I was hoping you'd say that." 3 weeks after first contact, Doctor stood in the newly constructed lunar research station, staring at technology that shouldn't exist. The Oran had built their communication post in just 5 days, growing it from the moon's surface like a crystal flower. The structure hummed with energy that human sensors couldn't properly measure. Admiral joined her in the observation dome. Despite the historic nature of their situation, noticed he looked tired. The past weeks had been filled with emergency meetings, panicked world leaders, and millions of people demanding answers nobody had. "The World Council meeting went as well as expected," said, settling into a chair beside her. "Half want to start packing immediately, half think this is some elaborate hoax, and the other half want to fight." "That's 3 halves," pointed out. "Politics has never been good at math," rubbed his eyes. "What about you? Any progress understanding our new friends?" Gestured toward the alien structure. "They've been incredibly helpful, actually. Maybe too helpful. They're sharing information that took their civilizations millions of years to gather. Historical records, technological data, even personal memories of previous Devourer attacks. And it's overwhelming. The galaxy isn't empty. There are thousands of intelligent species out there, most of them older than human civilization by factors we can barely understand. And they're all terrified of these Devourers." Ambassador materialized in the center of the room, her energy form taking on a more stable appearance than during the first contact. Had learned that this was a sign of respect in Oran culture. Maintaining a solid shape required significant effort for beings of pure energy. "Dr. Admiral, are you ready to review the historical records we discussed?" Nodded. "We want to understand what we're facing." Extended what might have been an arm toward a crystalline interface that grew from the floor. "Very well, but I must warn you, these memories are not easy to experience, even for those who have seen them many times." And each placed their hands on the crystal. Immediately their vision filled with light, then darkness, then something's mind struggled to process. She was floating in space, watching a star system die. Ships larger than moons moved between the planets, but they weren't ships in any sense she understood. They were alive, writhing masses of organic matter that pulsed with their own internal light. As she watched, one of the creatures approached a populated world. The planet's surface was covered with gleaming cities and orbital elevators that stretched into space. Could see millions of individual lights that she realized were beings trying to evacuate. Then, the Devourer arrived. It didn't attack with weapons. Instead, it simply pressed against the planet's surface and began to absorb. The cities dissolved into streams of matter that flowed into the creature's body. The screaming came through quantum communication channels, billions of voices crying out before being silenced forever. jerked her hand away from the crystal, breathing hard. Looked pale but kept his connection longer, his military training helping him process the horror. That was the Crystalline Empire, explained. They ruled 17 systems and believed their technology made them untouchable. The Devourer consumed their entire civilization in 4 hours. How is that possible? Asked. The Devourers are not just predators. They are the ultimate evolutionary success story. They began as a single species billions of years ago, but every civilization they consume adds to their knowledge, their abilities, their understanding. They adapt in real time. Finally removed his hand from the crystal. What's their weakness? The question seemed to surprise. Her form flickered. Weakness. Every predator has weaknesses. What hunts the hunters? Admiral, you misunderstand. These are not simple predators. They are a force of nature like entropy itself. One does not fight entropy, one adapts to it. Stood up, packing around the room. But they're biological, right? They have to follow some rules. Of course, but... Then they have weaknesses, turned to face the alien ambassador. You said they've consumed thousands of civilizations. Show us more records. I want to see every attack, every encounter, every time someone tried to fight them. His form became less stable. Doctor, I do not think you understand. We are not showing you these records to inspire resistance. We are showing you why resistance is futile. Let me be the judge of that, replied firmly. Over the next several hours, an experienced memory after memory. The aquatic, who tried to hide in ocean trenches. The machine collective known as the Eternal Network, who thought their digital existence would make them inedible. The warrior species called the Star Breakers, who met the Devourers with massive fleets and weapons that could destroy suns. All of them failed, all of them died, all of them were consumed. But began to notice patterns. Each species had approached the problem from their own perspective. They used hiding tactics that worked for ocean predators. The machines tried digital solutions. The warriors used brute force. They're all fighting the last war, she muttered during a break. What do you mean? Asked. Every species is using strategies that worked against threats they understood. But the Devourers aren't like any threat they ever faced before. Overheard, that is precisely why resistance is pointless. They are beyond conventional understanding. Shook her head. No, that's why conventional resistance failed, but what about unconventional resistance? Doctor, said slowly, in 47 cycles, across millions of years, thousands of species have tried every conceivable approach. What makes you think your young civilization could succeed where ancient empires failed? Looked at, who was studying tactical displays of Devourer movement patterns. Because we haven't been trying to survive for millions of years. We haven't learned to accept limitations. Explain. Looked up from his analysis. Every species you've shown us, they all have one thing in common. They're trying to preserve what they are, hide their nature, protect their territory, maintain their way of life. Of course, what else would one do? Change, said simply. Adapt, evolve, not just survive, but become something new. Was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a tone hadn't heard before. You speak of becoming something other than human. If that's what it takes. The other species, they chose to diminish themselves rather than risk total extinction. The crystalline architects gave up physical form to hide in pocket dimensions. The void runners gave up homes and became eternal nomads. The hive collective gave up individuality to spread their risk across billions of bodies. Nodded, and you gave up physical existence to become beings of pure energy. Yes, we survived, but at the cost of everything we once were. Stood up and walked to the window overlooking Earth. What if survival isn't the goal? Admirals, what if the goal is to make sure the Devourers never threaten anyone again? His form became completely unstable for several seconds before reforming. That is not possible. Says who? Asked. Every species that tried to fight them was trying to protect something. Their territory, their people, their way of life. That makes you defensive, reactive. What are you suggesting? Turned back to face them. We're not suggesting anything yet, but we want to see more data. Everything you have on Devourer biology, psychology, behavior patterns. And then, smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then we'll decide whether humanity evacuates with you or whether we solve the Devourer problem once and for all. For the first time since contact, Ambassador looked genuinely frightened. "Doctor, the Devourers are not a problem to be solved. They are a cosmic force." "So was smallpox," replied. "So was polio, so was death itself until we started working on fixing it." The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of alien technology and the distant sound of Earth turning beneath them. 18 months after first contact, humanity was divided. The Great Debate had split the species into two camps, each convinced they held the key to survival. Maria Santos, former Secretary General of the United Nations, stood before a crowd of 50,000 in what used to be Times Square. Behind her, massive screens showed images of colony ships under construction. "The choice is simple," she declared to the gathered crowd and billions watching worldwide. "We can accept the wisdom of species that have survived for millions of years, or we can let pride doom our children to death." The Exodus movement had grown rapidly. Nearly 1 billion humans had signed up for relocation to the Outer Rim territories. They saw the alien offer as humanity's only realistic chance of survival. "The Oran have shown us 47 cycles of devourer attacks," Santos continued. "Every species that chose to fight is now extinct. Every species that chose to adapt and hide still exists. Mathematics doesn't lie." 3,000 kilometers away, in the secret military facility beneath the Sahara Desert, Admiral walked through corridors that shouldn't exist. The Resistance Coalition had been busy. "Project Prometheus is on schedule," reported Dr. Sarah, leading him past laboratories where scientists worked with technology that made Iran equipment look primitive. "We'll have the stellar destabilization weapons ready within 6 months." Nodded, but his expression was troubled. Project Prometheus involved turning stars into weapons by causing them to collapse or explode on command. It was the kind of warfare that could sterilize entire star systems. "What about Project Pandora?" "Temporal warfare research is complicated," Doctor admitted. "We're essentially trying to build weapons that attack through time itself. The mathematics work in theory, but the energy requirements are enormous." They stopped at a massive blast door marked with warnings in 17 languages. Behind it lay Project Atlas, humanity's attempt to weaponize black holes. And Doctor asked, "Still working on the biological angle. She's convinced there's something everyone else missed about devourer genetics." Meanwhile, in her laboratory on the far side of the moon, stared at genetic sequences that had given her nightmares for months. The Oran had provided samples of devourer tissue from previous encounters, material that had somehow survived the consumption process. What she found didn't make sense. Computer displayed devourer genetic timeline again. The holographic display showed the evolution of devourer DNA across millions of years. But as studied it, she noticed something that made her heart race. Computer overlay standard evolutionary pressure markers. New data appeared on the display. What saw made her sit down hard. "Oh my God," she whispered. The devourers weren't originally apex predators. The genetic markers showed classic signs of prey species evolution: enhanced sensory organs, rapid reproduction cycles, and most tellingly, trauma response adaptations that only appeared in species that had been hunted nearly to extinction. She ran the analysis 3 more times to be sure. Each time, the results were the same. The devourers had started as prey animals that evolved into predators out of desperation. But that meant something else was out there, something that had hunted the hunters. His hands shook as she opened a communication channel to Admiral. "I need you here immediately. I found something." 2 hours later, arrived with Doctor and 3 other senior researchers. Showed them her findings, watching their faces change as they understood the implications. "If they were prey originally," Doctor said slowly, "that means their behavior patterns might still carry those instincts." "Exactly," said. "Look at their attack patterns. They always consume everything completely, leaving no survivors. That's not predator behavior, that's fear behavior. They're making sure nothing can hunt them back." Studied the genetic timeline. "What about their hibernation cycles? 50,000 years is a long time." "Trauma response," replied. "They sleep for long periods because they're still afraid of whatever originally hunted them. They only wake up when they get hungry enough to risk exposure." The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. "Are you saying the devourers can be scared?" Doctor asked. I'm saying they already are scared. They've been scared for millions of years. They just learned to be scary back. On Earth, the political situation grew more tense every day. The Exodus movement accused the Resistance coalition of gambling with humanity's future. The Resistance accused the Exodus of cowardice. Ambassador watched the human debates with growing alarm. In her millions of years of existence, she had never seen a species react to the devourer threat this way. Most civilizations either evacuated immediately or prepared conventional defenses that always failed. But humans were building weapons that violated every known law of warfare. They were researching technologies that other species considered impossible or insane. Worse, they seemed to be treating the devourers not as an unstoppable force of nature, but as a puzzle to be solved. Their psychological warfare division troubles me most, she reported to the Oran Council during a quantum meeting. They are studying our memory records not to understand the threat, but to find weaknesses in devourer behavior patterns. What do you mean? Asked Elder, speaking from the safety of a pocket dimension. They have identified what they call trauma responses in devourer attack patterns. They believe the devourers can be not just defeated, but domesticated. The silence from the council was profound. That is impossible, Elder finally said. The devourers are apex evolutionary perfection. Perhaps, but humans do not seem to understand what impossible means. Back in the Sahara facility, received a priority message from. Her voice carried an excitement that worried him. I need access to the Oran historical archives, all of them. I think I know why the other species failed. What did you find? They all tried to fight the devourers as if they were dealing with natural predators. But predators have predictable behaviors, territoriality, hunting patterns. The devourers don't behave like predators at all. Then what do they behave like? His answer chilled him to the bone. Abused children with the power to destroy civilizations. The next few weeks saw unprecedented cooperation between human factions. The Resistance shared findings with the Exodus movement, while the Exodus provided detailed psychological profiles of galactic survivor species. What they found was disturbing. Every surviving civilization had adapted by becoming less threatening, less noticeable, less alive in fundamental ways. They had all chosen over extinction. We're being offered the same choice, explained to a joint council of both factions. Become less than what we are or face death. What's the alternative? Asked Maria Santos. Looked around the room at faces representing all of humanity's hope and fear. We help them. Help who? The devourers. They're not evil, they're traumatized. They've been running scared for millions of years, and they learned that the best defense is overwhelming offense. You want to provide therapy to beings that have consumed thousands of civilizations. I want to give them something they've never had, replied. A safe place to exist without fear. Admiral stood up. Are you suggesting we try to cure the devourers? I'm suggesting we try to understand them. Every species that fought them treated them as monsters. Every species that survived treated them as natural disasters. But what if they're just people who never learned how to stop being afraid? Maria Santos shook her head. Even if that's true, they're still coming here. In less than a century, they'll arrive in this sector and they'll be hungry. Smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. Then we'd better be ready to feed them something other than civilizations. The room erupted in arguments, but noticed something interesting. Despite their disagreements, both factions were asking the same question. How do you save someone who thinks the only way to be safe is to destroy everything else? For the first time since the aliens arrived, humanity had a unified goal. They just had to figure out how to accomplish the impossible. Again, 127 years after first contact, the galaxy held its breath. The devourers had awakened early. Admiral Sarah, granddaughter of the legendary Admiral, stood on the bridge of the Prometheus watching deep space sensors track massive shapes moving between the stars. Her grandfather's tactics manual lay open beside her command chair, filled with strategies no previous civilization had ever attempted. How long until they reach the outer systems? She asked. 18 hours to the Vega colonies, her tactical officer replied. The evacuation fleets are already gone. Sarah nodded. The colonies hadn't been evacuated to save the people. they'd been emptied to remove witnesses. What humanity planned to do next would either work brilliantly or doom the entire galaxy to extinction. Across the galaxy, ancient civilizations watched their sensor networks in horror. The crystalline architects sent urgent messages from their pocket dimensions. The Void Runner fleets changed course to avoid the approaching darkness. The hive mind collective began dispersing its consciousness across backup bodies in distant star systems. But in the human sectors, something unprecedented was happening. Instead of fleeing populations, the Devourers would find empty colonies rigged with quantum resonance amplifiers. Instead of cowering defenders, they would encounter automated systems designed specifically to communicate with traumatized hive minds. Ambassador materialized on the Prometheus bridge, her energy form flickering with distress. "Admiral, your species still has time to evacuate. The first Devourer swarms will reach human space within days." Sarah looked at the alien ambassador with calm eyes. "We're not evacuating." "Then you are committing suicide on a galactic scale. When the Devourers finish with human space, they will be stronger than ever. Every other species will suffer for your pride." "Maybe," Sarah admitted, "or maybe it's time someone tried a different approach." The first Devourer to reach human space was designated Entity 7 by human tracking systems. It was a massive organic construct, kilometers long, with a surface that pulsed with absorbed starlight. Its approach to the Vega system followed the predictable pattern established over millions of years. But when it arrived at the first human colony, Entity 7 found something it had never encountered before. The colony was empty of life, but not silent. Quantum resonance amplifiers filled local space with a signal that penetrated directly into the Devourer's collective consciousness. The signal wasn't threatening or defensive. It was curious. "Hello," the message began, transmitted in mathematical concepts that any intelligence could understand. "We know you're hungry. We know you're afraid. We want to help." Entity 7 paused in its approach to the dead world. In millions of years of existence, across thousands of consumed civilizations, it had never received a message like this. "We studied your genetic patterns," the signal continued. "We know what happened to your species. We know about the others that hunted you. We know why you learned to be scary." For the first time in recorded history, a Devourer stopped moving toward prey. The signal changed, becoming more complex. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. You don't have to consume everything to feel safe. We can give you what you really need." Entity 7's collective consciousness, normally a seamless unity focused on consumption, began to fragment. Individual thoughts emerged from the hive mind, some confused, some angry, some feeling an emotion that had no name in their ancient language. Hope, on Earth, watched the readings from deep space with her great-granddaughter Maria, now head of the psychology division. Was 93 years old, but her mind remained sharp as she observed humanity's first attempt at psychological warfare against a cosmic threat. "Grandmother," Maria asked, "what if this doesn't work?" Smiled, "Then we try something else. That's what humans do." The second phase began when Entity 7 attempted to resume its approach to the colony world. This time, the quantum resonance amplifiers activated a different program. Instead of words, they transmitted something that struck at the deepest level of Devourer psychology, artificial memories of safety. The memories were crafted based on genetic analysis of pre-trauma Devourer DNA. His team had reconstructed what there might have looked like before whatever catastrophe drove them to become nomadic consumers. Green spaces, abundant food sources, and most importantly, no threats. Entity 7's approach vector became erratic. Its collective consciousness was experiencing something impossible, the memory of not being afraid. But the real surprise came when the Devourer tried to consume the empty colony. Hidden beneath the planet's surface, human engineers had prepared there. When Entity 7 began the absorption process, it didn't find normal matter. Instead, it consumed engineered parasites designed by Earth's greatest biochemists. These weren't parasites meant to kill. They were designed to introduce individual identity into a hive mind. As the microscopic organisms spread through Entity 7's massive form, individual Devourer subunits began to experience something their species hadn't known for millions of years. Separate thoughts, personal desires, individual fears. The effect was immediate and profound. Entity 7 stopped moving entirely, its consciousness fracturing into millions of individual voices, all asking the same question. Who am I? Across the galaxy, every monitoring station detected the impossible. A devourer had stopped consuming. Ambassador watched the readings with growing horror. What have you done? Sarah turned from her displays. We gave them back their individuality. Every devourer is actually millions of separate beings forced into a single consciousness by evolutionary trauma. We just reminded them that they're people, not weapons. You've created chaos. A fractured devourer consciousness could be even more dangerous than a unified one. Maybe, Sarah admitted. Let's find out. The third phase of humanity's plan activated automatically. Scattered throughout Entity 7's form, the identity parasites carried another surprise. Communication protocols designed to help newly individual minds coordinate without losing their separate identities. For the first time in millions of years, devourer subunits began talking to each other as individuals. They shared memories, fears, hopes they'd never been allowed to have. Most importantly, they began to remember what they'd been before the eternal hunger took over. The reports flooding into galactic monitoring stations understanding. Entity 7 wasn't just stationary, it was changing. Its biomechanical surface began to shift, growing structures that served no obvious survival purpose. Artistic patterns appeared on its hull. What looked almost like windows opened in its sides, revealing internal spaces filled with what could only be described as gardens. It's building a home, Maria whispered, watching the transformation from Earth's primary observatory. Nodded, they've been homeless nomads for so long, they forgot what it felt like to have a place to belong. But the test wasn't over. 7 more devourer entities approached human space, drawn by the quantum signatures of their changed sibling. Humanity's plan would succeed or fail based on what happened next. Entity 7, now calling itself by a name it created for the first time in eons, turned to face its approaching siblings. Instead of the usual coordination signals, it began transmitting something unprecedented. Stories. Stories of individual identity. Stories of feeling safe. Stories of being welcomed instead of feared. The approaching devourers slowed, their hive minds struggling to process concepts they had no framework for understanding. Some grew angry, interpreting transformation as infection or disease. Others became curious, drawn to memories they had thought lost forever. 3 entities attacked, trying to forcibly reintegrate it into the collective consciousness, but defended itself not with violence, but with memory viruses designed by human psychologists. Every attack transmitted more concepts of individual identity into the attackers' minds. 2 entities fled, carrying contamination back to the larger swarms. Their fractured reports would spread confusion through the entire devourer collective. 3 entities stopped and began their own transformation. Within months, human space became something unprecedented in galactic history, a sanctuary for recovering devourers. Individual entities that had broken free from the hive mind came seeking the psychological support that only humanity seemed able to provide. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the greatest threat to civilization began asking for help instead of consuming everything in their path. Ambassador found herself aboard a devourer bioship, now called a homeship, speaking with individual entities who had chosen names, developed personal interests, and were learning to exist without the constant fear that had driven their species for millions of years. How, she asked Admiral during her visit. Sarah smiled, echoing words her grandfather had spoken over a century ago. We didn't fight them as monsters or accept them as natural disasters. We treated them as people who needed help. But the risk was worth it, Sarah interrupted. Because now, instead of running from the greatest threat in the galaxy, we've just gained the most powerful allies anyone could imagine. As if to prove her point, long-range sensors detected massive shapes moving toward human space from across the galaxy. Not attacking, but seeking sanctuary. The word was spreading through the devourer collective. Humanity offered something no other species had ever provided. A place to stop being afraid. 50 years after the end of the Devourer War, the galaxy bore little resemblance to what it had been before humanity changed everything. Dr. Maria Prime stood in the central garden of New Geneva Station, watching her daughter play with children from 17 different species. The station orbited Earth, but its residents came from across the galaxy. Former devourers worked alongside Oran researchers, crystalline architects collaborated with human engineers, and Void Runner scouts shared navigation data with everyone. The galaxy had a new center, and it was humanity. "Grandmother would be amazed," Maria said to her companion, a former devourer entity who had chosen the name after discovering an affinity for marine biology. Its form had stabilized into something humanoid but clearly alien, with flowing appendages that helped it manipulate water-based experiments. Like all recovered devourers, it had grown far beyond its original programming. "Doctor was remarkable," agreed, its voice carrying harmonics that made the words sound like music. "She saw what we truly were when everyone else saw only what we had become." Through the garden's transparent walls, they could see one of the galaxy's greatest marvels, a devourer homeship in full cultivation mode. The massive biological construct had transformed itself into a traveling ecosystem, growing food and hosting research laboratories where former predators worked to heal damaged worlds. The transformation hadn't been easy. The Devourer War had lasted 3 years, during which humanity had to simultaneously fight entities that refused treatment, protect recovering ones from their former siblings, and convince the rest of the galaxy that the plan was working. Admiral had died in the final battle, leading a desperate mission to save a group of newly individual devourers from a collective that saw their transformation as disease. Her last transmission had been simple. "The hardest part about helping people is convincing them they deserve help." But humanity had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Of the original Devourer collective, nearly 60% had chosen individual identity and joined what was now called the Galactic Consciousness Alliance. 20% had fled to distant galaxies, carrying with them the memory viruses that would eventually transform them as well. Only 20% had fought to the end, choosing destruction over change. Maria walked through the garden to where Ambassador waited beside a memorial wall. The energy being had changed too, choosing to take on a semi-permanent physical form for the first time in millions of years. She looked almost human now, though she glowed with soft light and her edges occasionally became indistinct. "The council meeting went well?" Maria asked. Nodded. "The crystalline architects have agreed to leave their pocket dimensions permanently. They want to help with the terraforming projects in the former war zones." Maria smiled. That was the real miracle of the post-war galaxy. Species that had hidden for millions of years were emerging to help rebuild worlds that the Devourers had consumed. Former victims and former predators worked side by side to heal wounds that had seemed permanent. "What about the Void Runners?" "They've established permanent settlements for the first time in 40,000 years. They're calling them Hope Anchors and building them in systems where former Devourers are learning to create instead of consume." The transformation had been remarkable to watch. Without the constant fear that drove them to consume everything, the former Devourers revealed extraordinary capabilities for creation and growth. Their biotechnology surpassed anything the galaxy had ever seen, but now they used it to build gardens instead of weapons. "Any word from the deep space monitoring stations?" Maria asked. His expression became more serious. "Yes, long-range quantum sensors have detected signals from neighboring galaxies. Other Devourer-equivalent species exist out there, and some of them are troubled by what they've heard about our success." Maria nodded. They had expected this. Humanity's solution to the Devourer problem had sent shockwaves across the local galactic cluster. Other apex predator species saw the transformation as either an opportunity or a threat. "Are they coming here?" "Some are. The entropy weavers from Andromeda have already begun moving in our direction. They're similar to the Devourers but older, more refined in their consumption techniques. And the Reformed Collective has asked to send representatives to meet them at the galactic edge." The Reformed Collective was what the recovered Devourers called themselves. They had become humanity's first client species, but the relationship was unlike anything in galactic history. Rather than conquest or domination, it was based on mutual growth and healing. Maria looked out at the stars visible through the station's observation dome. "How many species are we talking about?" "Potentially thousands. The quantum signatures suggest an entire network of apex predator species that evolved similar survival strategies across multiple galaxies." It was a sobering thought. Humanity had solved one cosmic threat only to discover that the universe was full of similar challenges. What does the collective think about it? Smiled, an expression that would have been impossible for her species before contact with humanity. And the others are excited. They want to share what they've learned about individual consciousness and collaborative creation. They think they can help other predator species make the same transition they did. And if these other species don't want help, then humanity will have to find another impossible solution to an impossible problem. Maria laughed. That does seem to be our specialty. They were interrupted by Maria's daughter, who ran up with a group of friends including two young reformed devourers, a crystalline child that sang instead of spoke, and a small energy being that might have been Ambassador's offspring. "Mom, can we go see the new bioship that arrived today?" the little girl asked. "Says it has gardens that grow in zero gravity." Maria looked too, who nodded. "It's perfectly safe. The ship's collective chose the name Peacemaker and has been completely stable in individual mode for 8 years." As the children ran off toward the docking bays, Maria reflected on how much had changed. A century ago, the idea of children playing on a former Devourer vessel would have been the stuff of nightmares. Now it was just Tuesday. "You know what the most remarkable part of all this is?" asked. "What?" "We warned humanity about apex predators in the galaxy. We were completely right to be concerned about them." Maria raised an eyebrow. "But we were just wrong about which species they were." The observation made Maria think about her great-grandmother's final journal entry, written just days before her death at the age of 98. The galaxy spent millions of years learning to survive by becoming smaller, weaker, more hidden. They taught themselves to accept limitations as natural law, but limitations aren't laws of physics, they're just problems we haven't solved yet. The Devourers weren't an unstoppable force of nature. They were people who needed help, and nobody had bothered to try helping them. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is treat monsters like people and see what happens. Maria pulled out her personal communicator and activated the quantum link to the deep space exploration fleets. "Admiral Harrison, this is Dr. Prime." "Go ahead, Doctor." "The Council has approved expansion of the Consciousness Recovery Protocol to extragalactic operations. Begin preparation for long-range contact missions to the Andromeda Cluster." "Understood. Are we expecting hostile contact?" Maria looked out at the stars, where former predators and former prey worked together to build something the galaxy had never seen. A civilization based on healing rather than hiding. "We're expecting to make new friends, Admiral, the difficult kind." As she ended the transmission, Maria noticed had returned with the children. The former Devourer was teaching them how to create bioluminescent art using techniques that had once been used to dissolve planetary surfaces. "Dr. Prime," said, its harmonics carrying excitement, "I've been reviewing the deep space sensor data, the approaching entities from other galaxies. Their quantum signatures show similar trauma patterns to what the Devourers exhibited." "Which means they're not coming here to conquer. They're coming here because they've heard rumors that someone finally found a way to stop being afraid." Maria smiled. The galaxy had spent eons teaching itself that some problems were unsolvable, that some threats could only be endured or avoided. But humanity had a different approach to impossible challenges. They solved them, and then they helped others solve theirs. As the reformed bioship Peacemaker departed the station with its cargo of healing technologies and psychological support staff bound for the Galactic Rim, Maria realized that humanity had become something unprecedented. A species that actively sought out the galaxy's worst nightmares and turned them into friends. It wasn't the role they had asked for, but it was the one the universe needed. And humanity had always been remarkably good at giving the universe things it didn't know it needed. The stars held no more fear, only possibilities for growth, healing, and the endless potential for turning enemies into allies through the simple radical act of treating them like people who deserved help. Even if those people happened to be cosmic apex predators with the power to devour civilizations. Especially then,